The November wind cut across the parking lot of Ridgewood Prison, sharp enough to make anyone turn back. But Lena Ward didn't. She stood there for a moment, staring at the steel gate the same way she had every week for the past 3 years, hesitating, breathing in, gathering strength she no longer had. The guard tower loomed above her, cold and unblinking, as if judging every step she took. She pulled her coat tighter and forced her legs forward. Officer Harold Benton, the elderly guard with kind eyes and a silver mustache, was already waiting at the checkpoint. "You're early today, Mrs. Ward," he said, scanning her ID with a gentle familiarity that almost felt fatherly. "Hospital changed the schedule again," Lena replied. "Either now or next week." "Cold one out there," Benton muttered as he checked her bag. "Snow's coming." "Yeah," she said softly. "Feels like it." The metal detector buzzed, the gates slid open, and Lena stepped into the corridor she had memorized far too well. The air inside always smelled the same, disinfectant, steel, and something stale she could never name. Her heels echoed down the pale green hallway, a sound that used to make her nervous, but now simply reminded her how much her life had changed. 3 years. 3 years of routines, of visits, of waiting. Daniel had once filled her life with energy, oil-stained boots, confident laughs, big dreams he believed he could touch. He used to talk about owning a garage, about giving her the house with the little garden she wanted. But that version of him lived outside these walls. The man she visited every 2 weeks now was gentler, quieter, and far more fragile than she had ever imagined he could become. When the door to the visitation room opened, she nearly flinched. A guard guided Daniel in, his wrists free but his steps carrying the weight of the place. His eyes lit up the moment he saw her. "Lena," he breathed, crossing the room in seconds to wrap his arms around her. She returned the embrace, but only partially, careful, almost delicate, like someone afraid of breaking something already cracked. "You've lost weight," he said, pulling back to study her face. "You look tired." "It's just the hospital. Flu season," she said quickly, brushing it off. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. They sat across from each other at a metal table scratched with old initials. Daniel took her hands, rough from prison labor, but warm and trembling slightly, as if he didn't want to let go. "How's your week been?" she asked instead of asking about prison. She never liked hearing about the fights, the lockdowns, the ugliness. "Same old," he shrugged. "Laundry duty. Finished that book you brought me." "I brought more," she said, pulling 2 used paperbacks and a mechanic magazine from her tote. His smile, pure, grateful, childlike, stabbed her right in the chest. He talked about their future for the next 30 minutes. The garage he still wanted to open. The house he wanted them to buy. The life he was sure they would start again once he had served the remaining 4 years. Lena nodded, smiled, pretended, but her eyes drifted away when he wasn't looking. Daniel noticed. "Lena," he said softly, leaning closer. "You okay?" "Just tired," she lied, the words stumbling out too quickly. "You seem different today." "No," she forced a smile. "Tell me more about your plans." He did, and she listened with her heart clenched like a fist. When the guard announced that time was up, Daniel stood and hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he whispered. "More than anything. You know that, right?" Lena swallowed hard. "I love you too." 2 weeks, he asked. "You'll come back." "Of course," she whispered. But when the heavy steel door closed behind him, she stayed frozen in place, staring at the empty space he had just been in. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She wasn't crying because she didn't love Daniel. She was crying because next time, she wasn't sure she could still tell him she did. The house was quiet when Lena stepped through the door, the kind of quiet that felt heavy rather than peaceful. The porch light flickered behind her as she hung up her coat, trying to shake off the cold, and the guilt, that clung to her like a second skin. Before she even took a breath, Buster, their aging Labrador, patted over with his tail, wagging lazily. He pressed his head in her leg, warm and loyal as ever. "Hey, boy," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Daddy says hi." The dog didn't understand the words, but he felt the sadness in her voice. He leaned closer. Lena stroked his ears, forcing a smile that faded the moment she stood up again. She stared at the living room, the mantel lined with wedding photos, a couch Daniel used to fall asleep on after late shifts, the mug he always used still sitting on the shelf. She had left all of it exactly the way it was, as if preserving the past could stop it from slipping through her fingers. But life outside those prison walls didn't pause for her marriage. It wore her down. Cedar Hill Medical Center was her second home. Some weeks, it felt like her only one. Double shifts in the ER, sleepless nights, endless emergencies, people bleeding, crying, screaming. It was a place where chaos never stopped and compassion was currency. By the time she clocked out, she often felt like she had nothing left to give. And that's when she met him. It had been a night much like this, cold, quiet, unkind. She was charting patient notes when she heard footsteps coming down the hall. She didn't look up at first, but then she heard the voice, steady, warm, professional. "You look exhausted," he said. "Dr. Adrian Miles, the new surgeon the hospital kept talking about. Tall, composed, a man whose presence seemed to fill whatever room he entered. His scrubs were immaculate despite the 6-hour emergency surgery he had just finished. His eyes held a softness she wasn't used to seeing anymore. Lena tried to joke it off. Night shift is like that. But Adrian didn't smile. He didn't flirt. He didn't even try to impress her. Instead, he said something no one had said to her in a very long time. "I'm worried about you." Those 4 words did something to her heart. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was recognition. Someone finally noticing how hard she was fighting, how lonely she had become. She had spent 3 years being strong for Daniel, for the house, for the patients she cared for. Adrian was the first person who asked if she was okay. They shared coffee that night. 20 minutes became an hour. Then it happened again the next week. And the next. Conversations spilled into comfort. Comfort slipped into connection. She told him things she hadn't told anyone, like how she used to dance when she was younger, how she wanted kids one day, how some nights she cried herself to sleep because she didn't know how to carry the weight anymore. Adrian listened, really listened. He didn't judge her for being tired or overwhelmed or conflicted. He simply saw her, and she saw him too. His quiet humor, his fierce dedication to his work, the sadness behind his eyes when he mentioned a divorce years ago. They bonded over broken pieces neither of them had planned to reveal. Still, Lena fought it. She reminded herself that she was married. She wore her wedding ring like a shield. She avoided moments that felt too close. But human hearts don't always obey rules, especially hearts starving for connection. The night everything changed wasn't dramatic. No rainstorm, no big confession. Just 2 people sitting in the cafeteria at 3 a.m., exhausted, sipping cold coffee. Adrian reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. His touch was gentle, hesitant, as if giving her time to pull away. She didn't. And in that tiny moment, something inside Lena cracked open. All the longing, the guilt, the loneliness, everything she had buried finally rose to the surface. She felt alive again, seen again, wanted again. But the guilt came right behind it. Every time Daniel said, "I love you," every time he talked about their future, she felt like she was betraying a man who still held her picture by his bed. Yet every time Adrian looked at her, she felt the life she could have had if things had been different. By the time they shared their first kiss, Lena already knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the beginning of a truth she could no longer hide. Lakeview always had a way of looking like a postcard. Pine trees perfectly reflected in still water, cabin roofs dusted with frost, the kind of place couples went to rekindle something tender. But for Lena Ward, the quiet lakeside town felt like crossing a border she wasn't sure she should cross. She sat in the passenger seat of Dr. Adrian Miles's car, hands folded tightly in her lap, as they pulled into the gravel driveway of the Blue Harbor Inn. The wooden lodge glowed under warm lights, soft jazz drifting out through the lobby doors. It was romantic, disarmingly so. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Adrian said softly. Lena didn't answer right away. She stared at the lake stretching out behind the inn, a sheet of silver under the late fall sky. "Yeah," she whispered. "It is." Inside, the lobby smelled like cedar and fireplaces. Couples laughed quietly near the stone hearth. A clerk checked them in with a smile that felt almost intrusive. "One room, double occupancy," he said, glancing between them. Lena's breath caught for a moment. Adrian put a gentle hand on her back. "We can still leave if you want," he murmured. She shook her head. "No, I'm here." But even as she said it, guilt gnawed the inside of her chest. Their room looked out onto the lake, a wall of windows revealing the last streaks of sunset melting into the water. Lena walked toward it slowly, like she needed the view to steady herself. When her reflection met her eyes in the glass, she barely recognized the woman standing there, exhausted, torn, but craving something real, something hers. Adrian poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. "To the present moment," he said. "Just this. Nothing else." She nodded and touched her glass to his. The wine was tart and soft, warming her throat. For a brief second, she allowed herself to breathe. Dinner at the inn's lakeside restaurant felt unreal, as if they were playing a part in someone else's life. Candlelight softened Adrian's features, making him seem younger, gentler. They talked about everything except the things that hurt: favorite childhood memories, books they loved, places they wanted to visit one day. But eventually, the conversation drifted. "When I first met you," Adrian said, tracing the rim of his glass, "I thought you were the strongest woman I'd ever seen. But I also saw how much you were carrying." Lena blinked, surprised. "You barely knew me then." "I knew enough," he replied quietly. "And I see you now, even more clearly." She looked away, her throat tightening. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," he said, "but sometimes life doesn't wait for our permission." After dinner, they walked along the wooden platform wrapping around the lake. The night was warmer than it should have been, the air still and deep. Stars rippled in the dark water like tiny, trembling lights. Adrian slipped his arms slowly around her shoulders, giving her time to step away if she wanted. She didn't. She leaned into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under his coat. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Yes," he said, "it is." But he wasn't looking at the lake. When she turned to meet his gaze, the world seemed to pause. No voices, no guilt, no prison walls, just 2 hearts beating too close to ignore. His lips brushed hers, soft at first, then deeper, full of weeks of restraint finally breaking. Lena clutched his coat, holding on to him like he was the only thing keeping her upright. In the silence afterward, she whispered, "Take me to the room." The suite was warm, dim, private. The kind of room meant for people who belonged to each other, people who didn't have to hide. They moved slowly at first, both trembling with fear and longing. Every kiss felt like a confession. Every touch felt like an apology neither of them could speak aloud. When it was over, she lay in his arms, listening to his heartbeat instead of the storm in her mind. For hours, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling like wind ripping across the lake outside. She thought about Daniel's hopeful eyes, his trembling hands, the life they once imagined. She thought about the woman she used to be, loyal, committed, certain. And she thought about Adrian, steady, warm, offering her a future that didn't hurt. "What are you thinking?" he murmured, half asleep. "About impossible choices," she whispered. He ran his fingers through her hair. "When I'm in surgery," he said softly, "sometimes we have to cut deeper than we want, down to the bone. Not because we want to hurt the patient, but because it's the only way to save them." "Who's the patient here?" she asked. "You," Adrian said, "and Daniel, and me. Because living like this, it's killing all of us." She closed her eyes, tears slipping silently into his chest. By sunrise, she knew the truth she'd been avoiding. The moment she got back home, she would go to the lawyer. She would ask for divorce papers. And next week, she would tell Daniel everything. Lakeview wasn't just a weekend getaway. It was the point of no return. Daniel Ward had learned to survive Ridgewood Prison by shrinking his world down to a routine. Wake up, work, eat, read, sleep, repeat. It was the only way to make 7 years feel survivable. But ever since Lena's last visit, something in that routine had cracked. He felt at the moment he returned to his cell, a tightness in his chest, a knot he couldn't name. He sat on the bottom bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at the concrete floor like it might offer answers. Tony, Marcus Hill, his cellmate, was perched on the top bunk rolling a cigarette made from smuggled scraps. "So," Tony said, voice muffled by the mattress. "How's Mrs. Perfect visit this week?" Daniel didn't respond. Tony peeked over the edge, studying his face. "Oh, that bad." Daniel rubbed his hands together. They were trembling. "She's just different." Tony raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "I don't know," Daniel muttered. "Her voice, her eyes, the way she kept dodging things. She couldn't hold my gaze more than 2 seconds." Tony exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "Look, man, she's been visiting you every week for 3 years. That's loyal. That's rare. Most guys in here, their wives vanish after a month." "I know," Daniel snapped. "That's why this feels wrong." Back then, he couldn't fully explain it. It was instinct, something primal that whispered she was slipping away. He tried to shake it off, tried to blame the prison lighting or his own insecurities. But the next day, when the library opened for recreation hour, Daniel found something that made the knot tighten until he could barely breathe. There, on the front page of the city section, was Cedar Hill Medical Center celebrating its new surgical department. A group photo showed smiling staff lined up in their scrubs. And there she was, Lena, laughing at something the man next to her said. A tall man, dark hair, confident posture. His hand rested lightly, too lightly, on the small of her back. Daniel froze. The room faded. All he could focus on was that one moment frozen in ink. Her eyes, bright, soft, happy, were not the eyes she brought to him yesterday. "Yo, Ward," Harold the librarian called from behind the counter. "You reading or daydreaming?" Daniel didn't even hear him. Tony walked over and followed Daniel's gaze to the photo. "Oh," his face shifted. "That's something." "It's nothing," Daniel said too quickly. "Just a stupid picture." Tony slid the newspaper closer. "You sure? Because that looks like a hell of a smile." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Cut it out. Relax," Tony said. "But you wanted to check something?" Daniel looked up. "Check what?" "My cousin does medical supply deliveries," Tony said casually. "Hospital to hospital. Knows how to keep his head down. If you want him to keep an eye out." Daniel's first instinct was disgust. I would never spy on her. But then the image from the paper flashed again. Lena leaning in, that man whispering, her smile blooming in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years. The truth is, doubt spreads like poison. It only takes a drop. "I don't," Daniel began, but his voice shook. "I'll tell him to be subtle," Tony said. "Just in case." Daniel didn't answer. But he didn't stop him either. Days passed, and each one felt worse than the last. Lena didn't call. Her letters were shorter, rushed. When Daniel read them, he tried to convince himself he was imagining things. He tried to remind himself she loved him enough to stay, enough to wait, enough to hold on through the storm of his sentence. But the silence between her words was louder than ink. Then one night, Tony returned from his phone time with a look that made Daniel's stomach drop. "My cousin saw her," Tony said. Daniel gripped the bunk. "Where?" "Lakeview." "Lakeview," Daniel repeated. "Lakeview what?" "Blue Harbor Inn." Daniel's throat closed. "Just her?" "No," Tony hesitated. "With the guy from the photo." The world went numb. Tony added, softer this time. They checked in together. "Weekend trip. Private. You get what I'm saying?" Daniel felt his pulse hammering against his skull. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, all slamming into him at once. He shook his head violently. No, she wouldn't, she couldn't. "Buddy," Tony said gently, "sometimes people change." Daniel turned away, staring at the wall until his vision blurred. A tear slipped down, hot and unwanted. "She said she needs more time before our next visit," Daniel whispered, voice cracking. "Said she has something important to tell me." Tony let out a low whistle. That usually means one thing. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, he felt truly alone. And in the quiet of that cell, something dark began to grow, quietly, slowly, dangerously, inside the man who had once believed love could survive anything. Lena Ward sat across from the lawyer's polished oak desk, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. The office smelled faintly of paper and lemon-scented cleaner. Outside the window, the November wind rattled the blinds. She had signed discharge papers for dying patients with steadier hands than this. But this wasn't routine. This was the beginning of the end of a life she had promised to protect. "Everything is here," the lawyer said gently, sliding a thick envelope toward her. "The petition for dissolution, asset documents, statement of intent. Once he receives this, the process begins." Lena nodded, though the words made her chest ache. She tucked the envelope into her purse as if it were a live grenade. Adrian waited for her downstairs in the parking lot, leaning against his car with both hands in his pockets. When he saw her, his face softened. "How'd it go?" "It's done," she whispered. He reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you." I know that wasn't easy. It wasn't pride she felt. It was dread. She could already picture Daniel's face when she told him. The way his voice would break. The way he would stare as though she'd torn out something sacred. But she told herself the same truth Adrian had repeated for weeks. Honesty isn't cruelty. Staying in a lie is. That night, Lena barely slept. She rehearsed what she would say to Daniel. How she would apologize. How she would explain that she had tried so hard to hold on. But her heart had slipped away long before she wanted to admit it. Across town, inside Ridgewood Prison, Daniel Ward was sharpening a different kind of truth. In the dim light of the workshop, he worked silently, methodically, scraping a thin strip of metal against the rough edge of a concrete block. Back and forth, back and forth. The rhythmic sound echoed like a heartbeat, growing sharper by the minute. Tony hovered nearby, pretending to sort tools. "Cal, maybe this isn't a good idea," he said quietly. Daniel didn't look up. "I'm not going to hurt her." "Then why make that?" Daniel kept scraping. "To show her I know. To see it in her eyes. That's all." But even he didn't believe the words anymore. By the time the strip of metal was honed to a deadly sliver, Daniel's breathing had changed, shorter, quicker, more animal than human. His world had narrowed to a single point, the moment he would confront the truth. Later that afternoon, Daniel bribed a guard with 2 packs of contraband cigarettes, pressed into a handshake. Officer Griffin barely glanced at him. "You good?" Griffin muttered. "Just don't check my shoes too hard today," Daniel replied. Griffin nodded once. "I didn't see anything." A system already stretched thin cracked a little more under the weight of 2 desperate men. In his cell, Daniel pried open the worn sole of his shoe, a small hollow he had dug over weeks, and slid the shiv inside. The metal glinted once before disappearing into the darkness. Tony watched him, pale and jittery. "Cal, listen to me. Talking is one thing, but this is beyond talking." Daniel finally looked at him, eyes hollow. "She's all I have left, Tony. She promised she'd wait. She promised. And if she didn't," Tony whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I need to hear it from her. From her own mouth." For a moment, Tony saw something terrifying. Not rage, but a man unraveling, thread by thread. On Friday, the prison buzzed with its usual controlled tension as visiting hours approached. Lena parked outside the gate, her fingers trembling around the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, the divorce envelope sat like a sealed fate. Adrian touched her shoulder gently. "I'll be here when you're done." She nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold. Inside the checkpoint, Officer Benton noticed her trembling hands. "Everything all right, Mrs. Ward?" "Yes," she lied. "Just a difficult conversation." He gave her a sympathetic nod and waved her through. In the hallway, her heels echoed against the concrete, each step heavier than the last. She clutched the envelope to her chest as though it might keep her safe, as though truth alone could protect her. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that at the same moment, Daniel was walking down another hallway, escorted toward the visiting room with a weapon hidden in his shoe and a heart filled with a storm he could no longer contain. Lena believed she was finally choosing honesty. Daniel believed he was about to lose everything. And in Ridgewood Prison, 2 paths were moving toward each other, fast, unstoppable, and fatal. The visitation room was colder than usual that afternoon, the kind of cold that seeped into skin and bone. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, sickly glow across the rows of metal tables. The room was quiet, too quiet. Only two other families were present, both speaking in hushed tones, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Lena Ward stood just inside the doorway, clutching the divorce envelope to her chest. Her heart thudded unevenly, each beat echoing up into her throat. She kept telling herself she was doing the right thing, that honesty was better than a slow, quiet death of a marriage built on guilt. But as each second passed, dread pulled tighter around her ribs. The guard at the far end lifted his chin. Ward coming in. Footsteps approached. Heavy. Familiar. Daniel appeared, flanked by Officer Griffin, who gave a curt nod before stepping back to watch from the wall. The moment Daniel saw Lena, something in his face changed, just slightly, just enough. His eyes softened for a split second before tightening with a searching intensity. "Hey," he breathed, taking the seat across from her. "Hi, Daniel." She forced a smile, but her voice shook. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," she admitted. Daniel studied her face with painful precision. The way she looked down, the way she held the envelope like a shield, the way her fingers trembled. "You're scared," he said quietly. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Lena, what's going on?" She inhaled sharply. This was the moment she had rehearsed for days. "Daniel, there's something I need to talk to you about. Something important." He waited. She slid the envelope onto the table. Her hand lingered on it, as if releasing it required tearing out a piece of her soul. "I want to see a lawyer," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I filed for divorce." For a moment, everything froze, the lights, the air, even time itself. Daniel didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then his jaw twitched once, a tiny slip of control. "Why?" he whispered. "After everything, why now?" "It's been a long time coming," she said softly. "We've grown apart. I'm tired, Daniel. I can't keep pretending we're okay." "No." His voice cracked like a splintering door. "You said you'd wait. You said we'd start over." "I tried," Lena whispered. Tears formed, but she blinked them back. "But I can't live off promises anymore." Daniel shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear fog. "There's someone else." She swallowed hard. "Daniel, there's someone else." His voice darkened. "Who is he?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Daniel reached into his pocket and slid a folded newspaper photo across the table, the same one he'd stared at for days. Lena's smile. Adrian's hand on her back. Her breath caught. "Daniel, I'm sorry." "Say his name." She whispered, "Adrian." The word struck him like a blow. Daniel's expression changed in an instant. Love, grief, anger, betrayal, all twisting together until nothing human remained. "You lied to me," he whispered. 3 years, Lena. 3 years of waiting, of hoping, of being nothing but loyal. And you. "I never meant to hurt you," she cried. "But you did." His voice shook violently. "You killed me long before I ever hurt you." Her tears fell. "Daniel, please, let's just talk." He wasn't listening anymore. Something inside him snapped, clean, silent, deadly. Daniel rose slightly from his seat, and in that split second, he slipped his hand under the table, pried open the flap of his shoe, and pulled out the slim metal shiv he had hidden there. The blade glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Daniel, no." But the scream came too late. In a single, desperate lunge, he drove the blade into Lena's abdomen. Her gasp tore through the room. A second stab followed, then a third. Her hands rose instinctively, pushing against him, but he was already lost to the storm inside him. "Why?" he choked out with each thrust. "Why wasn't I enough?" Guards rushed forward. Officer Griffin tackled Daniel from behind, slamming him to the floor. The shiv clattered across the room. "Get medical." "Now," someone shouted. Lena collapsed sideways, sliding off the chair onto the cold concrete. Blood pooled beneath her, spreading fast, too fast. Officer Benton dropped to his knees beside her, pressing his hands to the wounds. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Stay with me." Her lips trembled, her eyes unfocused. She whispered one word, one name, before slipping into silence. "Adrian." Daniel heard it. Pinned to the ground, wrists twisted behind his back, he let out a sound that wasn't human, A howl of pain, rage, loss, all colliding in a single, broken cry. As paramedics carried Lena's motionless body out of the room, Daniel went still. Completely still. His face was wet with tears. His chest heaved. But his eyes, they were dead. In the place where love had once lived, there was now only the echo of a woman who would never walk back through those prison doors again. Detective Samuel Briggs arrived at Ridgewood Prison just minutes after the ambulance pulled away. The sun had already sunk behind the gray concrete walls, leaving the courtyard bathed in a bruised, uneasy twilight. Officers were shouting orders, radios crackling. The air felt charged, heavy with something more than violence, heavy with tragedy. Warden Philip Turner met Briggs at the gate, jaw clenched, posture rigid. "We lost a visitor," Turner said quietly. "Lena Ward. Stab wounds. Multiple." Briggs exhaled sharply. "And the suspect?" "Her husband, Daniel Ward." Turner nodded grimly. He didn't resist. Just sat there next to her, holding her hand. Briggs had been on homicide long enough to know the difference between rage and ruin. What Turner described sounded like both. They entered Visitation Room 3, now sealed with yellow tape. Blood still stained the concrete. A small detective novel lay on the floor, its cover soaked red. Briggs crouched beside the overturned chair, imagining the struggle, the panic, the moment everything snapped. "Camera?" he asked. Turner pointed to the corner. "Rotated at the wrong moment. Just caught the lead-in and the aftermath." Briggs sighed. "Convenient. We're looking into that too," Turner added, jaw ticking. In a nearby holding cell, Daniel Ward sat with his hands cuffed to a table. His prison jumpsuit was spattered with blood, his wife's blood. His eyes were red, swollen, empty in a way that unsettled even seasoned officers. Briggs stepped inside and took a seat across from him. "Daniel," he said calmly, "I'm Detective Briggs. I need to understand what happened." Daniel lifted his eyes slowly, as if the effort cost him. "She's dead," he whispered. "I killed her." Briggs turned on the recorder. "Tell me why." Daniel stared at the tabletop. She was leaving me. For someone else. She told me today." He swallowed hard. "A doctor. Adrian Miles." Briggs wrote the name down. "How did you know about him?" Daniel let out a broken laugh. "The newspaper. A picture." She smiled the way she used to smile at me. His hands clenched. "I asked Tony, my cellmate. His cousin works at the hospital. He saw them. At a hotel. At the lake." "So you brought a weapon," Briggs said gently. Daniel flinched. I didn't plan to kill her. I swear. I just needed to see the truth in her eyes." "But you hid a shiv in your shoe." "Yes," Daniel whispered. "Because I knew if I asked about him, she'd lie. And I couldn't," his voice cracked. "I couldn't take another lie." Briggs watched him carefully. Rage flickered here and there, but mostly Daniel radiated devastation, a man whose world had been ripped open. After documenting the confession, Briggs stepped out to speak with staff. Officer Griffin claimed he had missed the shoe search. Bennett insisted he'd seen nothing unusual. The camera rotation was described as routine, though the timing felt anything but. Turner promised internal reviews, but Briggs knew that prisons protect their own. Every answer here came wrapped in a cloud of smoke. At Cedar Hill Medical Center, Briggs sat across from Dr. Adrian Miles in a small consultation room. Adrian looked hollowed out, eyes rimmed with exhaustion and grief. "Emily, sorry, Lena," he corrected, voice trembling. "She was supposed to come meet me after the visit. When an hour passed, I knew something was wrong." "In your relationship with her?" Briggs asked. Adrian inhaled shakily. 8 months. We try to keep it clean. We try to be careful. She was going to tell Daniel today. She didn't want anything hidden anymore." "Did Daniel ever threaten you?" "No," Adrian whispered. "But I knew it would hurt him. I didn't think. I never imagined." His voice broke. Briggs believed him. Affairs didn't justify violence, but he'd seen enough heartbreak to know this one wasn't fueled by malice. It was fueled by collapse. Back at Ridgewood, Briggs met with Laura Bennett, the prison psychologist. She handed him a thin folder. "Daniel Ward is a textbook case," she said. His entire emotional stability hung on his wife. She was his anchor, his hope. And when that anchor disappeared, His mind broke, she replied simply. Not insanity, not psychopathy, just collapse. Years of suppressed fear, loneliness, and obsession detonated all at once. Briggs closed the file slowly. The pieces fit together too well. Jealousy, betrayal, emotional starvation, a system that failed twice. Once to prevent a weapon from entering, and once to see the signs of a man unraveling. The case was open and shut on paper. But in Briggs's mind, it was the kind of tragedy that left no survivors. Not Lena, not Daniel, not Adrian. Just 3 shattered hearts and the echoes of a truth spoken too late. In the weeks following the murder, Ridgewood Prison returned to its routines. Count times, steel doors slamming, guards shouting orders. But for those who had lived through the tragedy, nothing went back to normal. Not really. The air inside the facility carried a heaviness, as if the halls themselves remembered what had happened in Visitation Room 3. And at the center of that lingering darkness was one man, Daniel Ward. They moved him off the main block almost immediately after his confession, transferring him to a segregated unit, a quiet wing reserved for inmates who posed a risk either to themselves or to others. The cell was small, cold, the air stale. A camera blinked in the corner. For the first few days, Daniel barely moved from his bunk. His meals sat untouched on the metal tray. He didn't speak, didn't ask for anything, didn't rage or cry. He simply stared at the wall, as if waiting for a punishment even the legal system couldn't deliver. Detective Briggs visited him 4 days after the attack. The warden warned him not to expect much. Daniel hadn't said a single word since signing the confession. But when Briggs stepped into the interview room, Daniel was already seated, hands cuffed in front of him, eyes distant. "Daniel," Briggs said gently, "I wanted to check on you." For a long moment, Daniel didn't respond. Then, in a quiet voice that barely carried across the table, he asked, "Did they bury her yet?" "Yes," Briggs replied. "Her family held a small service yesterday. They kept it private." Daniel stared at the table, his jaw trembling. "I would have wanted to say goodbye," he whispered. "I know I don't deserve it, but I would have wanted to." Briggs studied him. There was no defense left in the man, no excuses, no anger, no justification. Just remorse so deep it hollowed him out. "You loved her," Briggs said quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. "She was my whole world. I built everything around her. Every day in here, I woke up because of her letters. Her voice." His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. He seemed dried out from crying. "When she said she was leaving, I didn't know where to put all that love. It turned into something else. Something ugly." "Have you talked to a counselor?" Briggs asked. Daniel shook his head. "I don't think talking will change anything." But that wasn't true, not entirely. Days later, Laura Bennett, the prison psychologist, began visiting him regularly. She sat with him for an hour at a time, asking gentle questions about his childhood, his marriage, his hopes, and the moment everything fractured. He didn't resist her presence. He didn't resist anything anymore. "You're not beyond help," she told him once, closing her notebook. "You're broken, but that's not the same as being gone." Daniel didn't argue, but he didn't believe her either. While Daniel drifted through the days like a ghost, the world outside moved forward. News outlets ran the story for a week. Man kills wife during prison visit. Affair sparks fatal confrontation. But like all tragedies that don't involve celebrities or serial killers, it faded from headlines just as quickly as it came. The only people left thinking about it were the ones who lost something real. Dr. Adrian Miles attended counseling offered by the hospital, though he barely spoke during sessions. Nurses said he cried once, quietly, in the locker room, before shutting down again. He took a leave of absence. No one blamed him. At the Harper home, Lena's mother boxed up her daughter's belongings in silence. She kept the wedding photo, though, not to honor the marriage, but because Lena's smile was too beautiful to throw away. As for Daniel's cellmate, Tony, he withdrew, haunted by his own guilt. He was the one who'd set his cousin on the trail, the one who fed the jealousy that spiraled out of control. He avoided the other inmates, too shaken to hide behind jokes or bravado. Inside Segregation Unit E, Daniel continued his slow descent into a quieter version of grief. He wrote no letters. No one wrote to him. The stack of old envelopes, the ones he once read like scripture, were gone now, locked away in evidence boxes. One evening, as guards performed their usual checks, they found Daniel sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, staring at a faint reflection in the stainless steel toilet bowl. He wasn't crying. He wasn't praying. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply remembering her laugh, her hands. The first time she said his name with love. The last time she said it with fear. In that moment, Daniel understood the full weight of what he had done. He didn't just lose his wife. He lost his future, his identity, the version of himself she once believed in. Detective Briggs wrote his final report a week later. One line stood out more than any other. There are no winners in this case. Only people who loved, people who hurt, and people who broke. Daniel Ward lived on. But the man he had been, the man Lena loved, died with her in that visitation room. And that was the true aftermath of the crime. A life that continued, but a soul that never recovered.